Hi, welcome to our July update. We've had a very prolific year. We've set crop, we've had a lot of new healthy growth on the trees. We've been lucky with a lot of rain, of course, and we've also had quite a bit of fruit setting, and that's a great place to be. This tree, Michelin, for example, has a reasonable amount of crop on it. You'll notice it's very narrow. That's precisely the shape that we want. The narrow canopy pruning system maximises light for us, and it encourages healthy fruit set and also fruit ripening, good coloration. So between these Michelin, there are smaller trees. These went in 2.5 years ago, that's golden rennet, and they're starting to produce their roots because they always must form their roots first, and the new growth is coming through. And that's really all you're expecting in the first few years from trees. If we come through this way, I'll show you the wildflowers, and the wildflowers here are extraordinary. We're very fortunate to have this orchard set out really in an ancient meadow that's not been ploughed or sprayed for a very, very long time, and as a result it has many, many species. So we see the giant hogweed, well, not the giant hogweed, the common hogweed, and the creeping thistle, and they're often thought of as pests, but in fact if you have a look over here, you'll see just how important they really are. This plant, for example, is completely covered with many different insects. Some of them have a direct benefit, for example the honeybee, some of them don't. So we've got small green beetles, but we see a lot of hoverflies on there, and predatory beetles. Makes a huge difference to pest control if you provide them with nectar. Some of them, their larvae are predatory, but many of them have a mixed diet. They feed on insects and on nectar. So by leaving those in place, we encourage the biodiversity, which is an absolutely critical part of our growing system. And these thistles also have a huge number of insects associated with them, and also birds like goldfinches, which are now nesting in the orchard, will be able to come back to these thistles later on and feed on the very nutritious seeds in the autumn. There's a soldier beetle feeding on the nectar on the thistle, and just below it are the aphids, which are taking some of the excess sap, and they're being farmed actually by a red ant species which we have in the orchard. We have many ant species in this orchard. Now that could be seen as a disadvantage, but in fact that's a food supply, not just for the ants, but for things like ladybirds and their larvae, lacewing hoverfly larvae. Buttercups, which are hugely important for nectar. And then over here we've got probably the most important flower in terms of nectar and use to the trees. This is called Yarrow or Achillea, and it's reckoned to be the most important of all the wildflowers you can have in an orchard for predatory insects. So you can probably spot quite a few hoverflies just landing and drinking the nectar. Their larvae, which are laid on trees, will control the aphids, and we have virtually no aphids in this orchard. We have a few, but they're controlled very, very quickly. And that control system is not run by us, it runs itself. All we do is just let nature work, and then the sheep come in later and graze the orchard in late autumn. So it's a simple system, it doesn't cost us any money, and of course it's helping the carbon fixation, because as these plants grow, they're secreting plenty of nutrients into the soil and sugars which feed the bacteria and the fungi, which in turn die off and add a huge amount of carbon. The nettles in the middle of this row are gradually declining, and the grasses are taking over with the cow parsley, and that's all a sign of the way the nutrients are being taken up by the trees. Because one of the biggest issues now is nitrogen and the metabolism of nitrogen in growing, and the way we run things here, most of the nitrogen that goes into the trees is actually generated by bacteria that live in the soil, and some comes from feed and some comes from the breakdown of material. But by doing that we prevent nitrates really entering the trees. Most of the nutrients come in as protein based, which of course means you have a much healthier tree. So this Harry Masters jersey, for example, shows the effects of a very low nutrient or low nitrate diet, very healthy wide leaves, lots of well-spaced growth. You can see that there's no zinc deficiency here. There's very small amounts of mottling here or there, which you do get sometimes from wind damage. But overall, this is a very healthy tree. And that balance between the nitrogen in the soil, in the air, and in the tree is really a hallmark of regenerative growing. This is Roll's Prune, which is a Gloucestershire plum, or damson really. It's a damson that fruits very well here. We do well with damsons, and it's set its first crop. And it's got that good balance between growth and fruit, which is an important balance. You don't want too much of either. And we set our first commercial crop of the Aylesbury prunes, which we were looking at earlier in the year. And there are a few hoverflies looking for a few aphids, but overall the crops hold on very well, and we'll be picking that later in the end of September.